So good morning, a warm welcome from wherever you are tuning in to our IJP Climate Talk number 6 today on sustainable fashion. I think everybody has, or almost everybody has at the moment, the same problem. As COVID measures have eased and we are allowed to fully go back to our workplaces, schools, universities, go shopping, and do errands, we spend again time in front of our wardrobes. Is this dress okay for the meeting today? Or would my friends wear the same kind of things for partying or theater, museum, or it's hot, it's cold? We are getting out again, you just name it. And humans, of course, always needed to protect themselves against the odds of nature. But fashion has, for hundreds and thousands of years, become a little bit more than just protection. It was and it is a sign of social status, of beauty, taste, and an expression, of course, of religious belonging. In short, it's a cultural marker, I would say. That's a little bit my personal opinion, but still. And we put on clothes to function in the world, as easy as that. However, this has become a more and more critical issue. European consumption of textiles has the 4th highest impact on the environment and climate change after food, housing, and mobility. And you won't believe it, I didn't believe it until I read the numbers yesterday. Europeans throw away 11 kilos of textiles every year. Imagine, babies don't throw away, so it makes a little bit more for the Middle Agers or whoever. So global textiles production doubled just within the range of 15 years from 2000 to 2015. And the consumption of clothing and footwear is expected to increase by 63% by 2030. So a real issue to address. But today we are not, of course, we will touch, but we are not looking at the problems, but we all will try to be aware of the problem and discuss the possible solutions. And I have the pleasure to have 2 experts, 2 guests who will discuss this and who will give us valuable inputs today. First is Francesca Romana Rinaldi. She is director of Circular Fashion Masterclass at Bocconi University in Milano. Buongiorno, Francesca, and she is today in Milano.
Thank you, Martina.
Welcome for taking the time. That's very highly appreciated. Her research activities focus on traceability, transparency, and circularity in fashion. And she is also an expert on the United Nations Economic Commission's for Europe projects, and she's investigating. I have already, or Natsuko and the office have already sent around the link to one of her books on the traceability and transparency in garment and footwear, and very much focusing on the near future, so what fashion could be in 2030. Now, welcome to Brussels, Emily McIntosh. She's Policy Officer for Textiles at the European Environmental Bureau, EEB, in Brussels. And Emily has not only many years of expertise in this sector, but I'm sure you would love to learn that Emily is coming from a journalistic background as well. So a very warm welcome to both of you, Francesca and Emily. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Before we get digging into the topic, Emily, could you just enlighten us a little bit what the EEB is all about?
Yeah, thanks, Martina, and good morning, everyone. So the EEB stands for the European Environmental Bureau, and we're the largest network of environmental citizens organizations, and we're based here in Brussels. We have over 170 members in every European country, and in a nutshell, we work on advocating for progressive policies, following the EU decision-making processes, as well as global processes, to advocate for a world where people and nature thrive together, working on lots of different topics from agriculture to industry, And I'm working on circular economy in the circular economy team, focusing on textiles. So yeah, if you want to know anything more about the EEB, you can just go to our website. And yeah, we're based in Brussels. I think I said that.
Thank you. In a few seconds, Francesca, we will come to you. One housekeeping remark, the meeting is recorded today, and we will have the link on our website by next week. And we will also supply you with a written summary and with all the useful links and addresses that are necessary in terms of looking back if you need more information. And if you like to ask the question, you're most welcome to do that in the chat. Francesca and Emily will look at them. If they rely immediately to their presentation, then they will get back to them. Otherwise, you will have, after both of their presentations, time to discuss with us in a more open session. But still, questions, please, in the chat. And if you feel comfortable, mention your name and country of origin. So, Francesca, the floor will first be open to you. You are coming from the land of fashion and beauty, and we always have in mind that, you know, Italy is the place to be if you want to be nicely well-dressed, but also by now following a more sustainable line. So give us a little bit more insight of your research and the critical points and arguments you'd like to put the finger on if we pursue, or if you'd like to pursue, a more sustainable fashion industry in the next years to come. Floor is open to you, Francesca.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I hope you can hear me well. Let me know if there is any issue with the connection. So yeah, I actually wrote a book a few years ago. It was 2019, and I was already asking myself what is going to be the future of the industry going towards 2030. Well, as you know, 2019, it was before the pandemic. It was before the new EU Sustainable Textile Strategy that was just published actually on March 30 this year. But I'm glad to say, well, I don't know if it's good news, but definitely what I wrote in the book in 2019 is probably going to be accelerated even more. The pandemic probably was a booster, and probably the only positive element coming from the pandemic is the fact that the consumers are much more aware, and also the companies understood that we need to find better solutions in order to manage waste. So the legislation is coming, the directive from the European Directive on Waste, it's already there. It has been there since 2018. But definitely now there is a stronger awareness. So I would say that what I'm going to tell you now, that is coming from the book Fashion Industry 2030, is probably going to be even closer to us. So probably we will not have to wait 2030 to achieve these goals. So in the book, Fashion Industry 2030, I leverage on topics that I already discussed in the previous book, The Responsible Fashion Company. So starting from Fashion Industry 2030, it took about 3 years to collect all the material, more than 50 interviews and video interviews to experts, opinion leaders, of course, managers as well, working in the fashion industry, but also NGOs and institutions. You will find some of them in the book trailer that we will not show today for a matter of time, but we can actually I can post it in the chat in a little bit. And also on the Instagram account Fashion Industry _2030, you will find a lot of interviews, extracts from the interviews in order to continue the conversation, if you would be interested to do so. So in a nutshell, which are the main drivers of change according to the interviews and the material collected for the book Fashion Industry 2030? I will say three main drivers of change: traceability and transparency, circularity, and collaborative consumption. Let's start from the first, traceability and transparency. If we look at it carefully, we will see that traceability and transparency is not at the same level as a system, is not at the same level of circularity and collaborative consumption. Traceability and transparency are actually to be considered as enablers for sustainability and also circularity. And collaborative consumption is one of the options we will see of circularity. Why traceability and transparency are so important for sustainability and circularity? Let me just mention a simple example. If we make a claim, a circularity claim, let's say this product is 100% circular. This claim has a problem. Has a problem because I'm not actually declaring, or it's not easy, at least for companies, to collect all the information and declare clearly and I will say objectively, all the contents that are needed in order to sustain this claim. So more and more in the future, in order to fight greenwashing, companies will be asked to justify their circularity claims and also their sustainability claims. So we will not be able to use the claim 100% circular in the future, but we will be asked by the legislator, but also by the other stakeholders working along the value chain to justify, again, our sustainability claims. So traceability and transparency are needed and are an important enabler to sustain our claims in order to fight greenwashing, in order to create trust in the industry. And we understood in the last decades that the trust in the industry, not just the one with the consumers, but also with the other stakeholders involved, including suppliers and not only, has been shaking. So we need to go back to building trust and rebuilding trust through traceability and transparency. So circularity is the main accelerator of the industry. We know that we need to go towards circularity, and that is the only chance we have in order to reduce waste in the industry. My point today is that circularity doesn't just mean recycling. Circularity is much more. Circularity is also collaborative consumption, collaborative fashion consumption options. In the book, and maybe you have been also discussing about how to reshape the value chain, the linear value chain models also in other industries. But in the book, I focus mainly on the renewed fashion value chain in the fashion industry. And you see from this graph that some big changes are going to take place. If we compare it with the traditional linear value chain approach, which is the one that is mostly implemented by companies today. So we are still working with a linear approach. But we know also, and companies are working on it right now, so we expect big changes in the next few seasons, months, years. That they need to start from eco-design principles, so implementing eco-design principles in order to extend the life of the garment. What does it mean, implementing eco-design principles? Well, it means, for example, to plan the collections and also choose the raw materials according to important principles such as monomateriality or easy disassembly, so that you will be able to easily be able to get to the raw material back again in order to start a new cycle. So this cannot happen at the end of the value chain. This needs to start at the very beginning. Again, from the very beginning, means to plan ahead in order to source the right ingredients. There are some activities of the circular value chain that will be completely re-scratched, I would say. Think about distribution and sales. So in the future, and this is an example already of collaborative fashion consumption, we will give many options to the consumers. So we will not just give the option to the consumers to buy a product new, but consumers will have the chance also to buy a used product, or as they like to say, pre-loved, so secondhand. So this is the so-called re-commerce. The re-commerce potential is huge in the industry, especially among new generation of consumers, millennials and Generation Z. And there are many reports that are confirming this. But we also have other chances. So for example, we could give the opportunity, and this is another example of collaborative fashion consumption, to end users to rent or do subscription rental instead of buying a product. So many chances will be there, many opportunities will be there to create a, I would say, better and different connection and relationship with final users. I like to call them final users instead of consumers, as a matter of fact, because it's a different way of consuming. It's more at the maximum level, try to use the most and leverage the most out of the product we are, I would say, either buying or again, using. And then we have the communication and engagement activity that is also very important here to analyze. In the book, I explain precisely what's going to happen looking at the data that we have available. But it's clear the direction that the industry already took. We need a much more one-to-one approach rather than a one-to-many. And this will be done also looking at the use of technologies such as blockchain. Getting back to the topic of traceability, traceability will help us to collect the information that will also be engaging much more the final users. So there are two new, completely new activities that we used not to see in the linear approach. Use, care, and disposal. So this means that fashion companies will be asked, probably also with, I would say, EPR programs, but they will actually be asked to be responsible for the waste, to be responsible for also educating the final users to use better, to care more, and also to dispose the products. We are not used or so much used in the fashion industry to consider the waste as a resource. We know now that we need to consider the waste as a resource, and the European Commission clearly defined this topic in the EU Sustainable Textile Strategy out on March 30 this year. And finally, recycling and upcycling. Again, circularity is not just recycling. Of course, we have a huge potential coming from recycling, but we still need to solve a lot of issues related to technologies, related to sorting of material, and also related to eco-design principles. As said, eco-design is not the standard. It should become the new standard, as the European Commission also mentioned, but it is not yet. So a lot of training, a lot of education is needed in order to reach all these goals and go through all these changes that are related to the processes, not just the final materials. They're actually coming from the value chain. So new keywords such as circular design, zero waste approach, on-demand production, full transparency, full care information, take-back schemes, recycling, and also upcycling. Upcycling means that we give a bigger value in terms of quality and also in terms of functional value to the product compared to the traditional recycling. And downcycling means that you give a lower value instead. So this will be the new standard in the future, but we still need to get there. We need to work on it. But I believe that it will take even less than now it's 8 years. Of course, you can approach circularity looking at different, I would say, paths. One will be the one of being fully circular, also being born circular. Think about great players, even if it's not big, they are actually small players, SMEs, or even social cooperatives such as Progetto Quid, you may have heard about, but you can, again, write in the chat the link to the website of Progetto Quid so you will know more. So Progetto Quid is a social cooperative that is using recycled, is implementing the recycling business model. They're using unsold stocks of fabrics coming from mainstream players. One of the players was Vivienne Westwood, and they are giving a second life to these textile stocks, basically. That are either donated or they are sold, but with a reduced price. And Progetto Quid is giving work to more than 120, actually both women and men, but with a fragility situation. So either coming from work countries, migrants coming from work countries, or I don't know, issues that they had to face in their life. And they actually, Progetto Quid is giving back also a second life, second working life, of course, to these employees. So Progetto Quid was born with sustainability and circularity in their DNA. Also, Orange Fiber is the same, has the same approach. Orange Fiber is an innovative startup, Italian. They are from Sicily, actually. I don't know if you have heard about them. And Orange Fiber is reusing the waste of the oranges in order to make a new fiber that is similar to silk in a blend. And they have been collaborating with Salvatore Ferragamo with a capsule collection that was a success. And Orange Fiber is also working with many other players in the industry. And they also reached the right scalability, actually the right scale, in order to really make an impact in the industry. So we have these kind of players, but we also have mainstream players that instead of entirely update their business model towards circularity, they take a step-by-step approach, maybe partnering with these SMEs, circular SMEs, or maybe creating an innovation center on circularity, so internally, or maybe investing on equity in these SMEs. So there are many different approaches mainstream players can take in order to invest on circularity. And we understood, and I'm getting already to the last few minutes of the presentation, that collaborative fashion consumption options will be relevant for us in the future. Right now, we see a lot of third parties, let's say. We see a lot of players, mainly marketplaces, that are offering either a rental option or re-commerce. Think about Rent the Runway in USA for the rental and Vestiaire Collective for the re-commerce. But soon, and we already see some examples in place, fashion players will also decide to manage directly these services, because we're actually going towards services now. We are not anymore selling new products. We are not talking about manufacturing here, but we're talking about how to extend the life of the garment, which is the real meaning of circularity. This means also teach again the final users to repair. which is definitely the first option we have in circularity to extend the life of the garment. So if I need to tell you in a nutshell what could be the future of the industry towards 2030, those are the 6 sentences that I used in order to summarize the big changes that are already taking place in the industry, starting from the first, having traceable and transparent value chains. We know that it will be hard to go towards 100% traceability, even if we believe strongly on traceability. And as you mentioned, especially in UNECE, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, we are working very hard in order to influence all stakeholders. And I also invite you to participate as a community to join the sustainability pledge. And I will again mention this in the chat, but the sustainability pledge call is a call to action inviting all actors that believe the same, that believe that traceability and transparency are important, and all actors should join this evolution. So again, traceability and transparency are probably the first enabler that we need in order to go towards a just transition towards circularity. And if you would like to know more, I would be happy to tell you more later on today. But we are inviting as UNECE, and we strongly believe as UNECE in the big change that will come thanks to a higher level of traceability and transparency, and especially from a new standard of traceability. We know it's going to be hard, it's going to take place, it's going to take time in order to be implemented and to be in place, but we know that the direction is clear. And technology will be of support. In the future, the smart labels and maybe even the digital products, passports will be actually leveraging on the traceability contents. Involving the consumers, or as we like to say, final users in a take, make, remake model is also needed. And it's probably, again, the only way we have in order to go in the right direction, circular and sustainable direction. So many options will be given to prolong the life of the product. And as said, technology will be there, but we also know that technology is not the main character. It's not
Francesca, that. Could you
yes.
Come to an end, please?
Sure. Yes. Sorry for that. Technology is not the main character, it's just an enabler. We need people taking the right decisions. It's not technologies doing so. Granting consumer centricity, engagement, and inclusivity, as we said, one-to-one communication. Servitization, we already mentioned this with collaborative fashion consumption. This is already the present, is not going to be the future many years from now. And in a nutshell, making profits without harming the environment or society could seem idealistic, but it's not. This is the only way to go towards a just, circular, and sustainable transition. So I invite you all to join the discussion, and definitely I will be happy to do a Q&A also afterwards. And I leave the floor to Emily now, and this presentation will be with you. So I already shared it with the team.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I think Francesca mentioned so many points Emily you would like to refer immediately to. And there is one, I think, a very important question that was in the chat, if the blockchain technology is already in place to trace parts of fashion in the industry. But now, maybe Emily could refer immediately to that question in the chat, and then floor is immediately open to you, Emily, please.
I don't have an answer on blockchain, so do you want to answer the question, Francesca? Maybe it's more
sure. Sure, I will just mention in the chat now for the whole community the link to the pilot projects that we are implementing at the UNECE, leveraging on the technology on blockchain for sustainability and circularity. So you will have also some examples to go deeper on. All the material is there, so you can actually go more in depth into that material to explore some pilot projects that are already taking place. Of course, we need to solve problems related to economies of scale that still need to be solved. But of course, this is the beginning of any new technology.
Now the floor is open to Emily.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to check, can you see my slides? And
yes.
Can you see them? I don't know how to get them to move. That's not good. Are they moving now?
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay. I can't see them though. Hold on. Okay, well, I'll just see them. Okay, so thank you very much, Francesca, and thank you, Martina, for the invitation to speak today. Yeah, we already introduced the European Environmental Bureau, so we're coming at the textiles issue, looking at it from the EU policy perspective. So today I'm going to kind of give you an overview of the emerging policy framework in terms of textiles at the EU level, and I hope that my presentation can give you, as journalists, an overview of the areas where I think the stories are. So some food for thought in terms of the different issues. And let's go on to the first slide. So just to take a step back for a second, Francesca already mentioned that there was the EU textile strategy was published at the end of March. So this has been, there's been growing calls for many years to increase EU regulation on this very under-regulated sector, and the EU textile strategy was the European Commission's political response to that. And so the strategy contains a very high-level vision, which I have on the slide there. I'll let you read that yourself, but yeah, basically to have the textiles produced in respect of social rights and the environment, that they last for a long time, they're to a great extent made of recycled fibres, free from hazardous substances. So what I want to do today is give you a bit of an idea to what extent we think the strategy actually, the measures that it contains, whether they are up to the task of meeting that very ambitious vision. So the first thing to say is that the EU textile strategy is not a proposal for a new law itself. It's rather a collection. It's a strategy. So it's an action plan of different measures and plans, which will be coming, and they all have their own specific timeline. So it's wrong to say that it's a new EU textile law or a new EU law on fast fashion. Rather, it's a plan that contains different measures, which we'll get into. And the textile strategy really covers all products, all textile products, but it does have a particular focus on fast fashion, and it rightly recognises that clothing comprises 81% of EU textile consumption. And indeed, as you can see on the slide, clothing and fashion make up 60% of global demand for fibres. And I also have on the slide there some facts which you can read as well, just about the overall impact, and those come from the European Environment Agency's most recent findings. So just let's get into it. So in the textile strategy, the main part of the textile strategy really is the proposal for new binding eco-design measures for textile products on the EU market. So this would be in the form of a regulation. So this is the regulatory substance, essentially, of the textile strategy. And the idea is that there would be rules which would be set to say how textile products put on the EU market would be designed, with the aim of making them more durable, more repairable, and more recyclable, for example. And I want to kind of give you a few things to think about in terms of the setting of eco-design or making more products more durable. Because while it is true that it's really important to extend the life of products and that durable products are desirable, and that we have a situation where there has been a lack of quality, and you do have the situation where lots of textile products essentially fall apart. that's not the whole picture, and we shouldn't misunderstand what drives new consumption across the board, because it would be wrong to say that new consumption is always driven by the need to replace a faulty or a broken product. So, and I think the risk with the textile strategy is that the focus is very much on making products more circular, more durable, more sustainable, but not actually looking at the amount of products which are put on the market in the first place. So what we really need is a more holistic view of durability that goes beyond looking at the physical properties of the product and looks at the economic conditions in which those products are sold. So what I basically am trying to say is that the amount of products put on the market, it really matters. And again, on the slide, you have a few statistics there, which show you that basically in the last 2 decades, since the early 2000s, fashion production has doubled, and it's expected to double again in the next decade. So in that context, you can really see how sustainable would it be to have, for example, a weekly collection of so-called durable products. And then I've got a graph here on the side which shows you the, you may have heard of Shein, which is one of the biggest turbo fast fashion brands of the moment. And just you can even see how many products they put on their website every day in comparison to other competitors. If we set into law durability criteria or sustainability criteria that essentially allowed brands to continue producing the same amount of products as long as they were deemed to be so-called durable, I think we have to ask questions about how sustainable that would be. So so to reiterate the point, we need to tackle the root cause of the problem as well as looking at the physical properties, which is overproduction. And in the textile strategy, the Commission does encourage businesses to reduce the number of collections every year, but it doesn't actually have any measures that as to how they would do that. And what we advocate for at the EB is resource use reduction and a resource use reduction target with specific criteria for textile products to actually look at bringing down resource use reduction when it comes to textiles. And this aspect here is very much present in the next topic I want to look at, which is the limits of recycling and recyclability. So the bulk of brand sustainability strategies are actually, as you'll probably know, as consumers, are based on continuing to produce the same amount, but using a certain amount of recycled fibers. And the new eco-design rules are also set to probably to set a mandatory level of recycled fiber content. And in many ways, this is to be welcomed and is a good thing. But it's also important to look at the limits of recycling and recycled content. And can you actually really recycle clothes? As Francesca mentioned in her presentation, a lot of textile recycling is actually downcycling, and fiber to fiber recycling, so having clothes that are recycled back into clothes, is still very much in its infancy. And also when you're talking about recycling, you need to think of the collecting and sorting infrastructure behind that. And going back to the high, the prevalence of clothes being sold to us as sustainable, which include recycled fiber content, in reality, much of that recycled content is actually made from plastic bottles, which from our perspective is a false green solution, because you can't recycle then those products back. It's just delaying their road to landfill because you can't recycle them further. And recycled plastic fibers still shed microplastics. And the good news is that in the textile strategy, the Commission does recognise that the recycling, making clothes from recycled bottles is essentially greenwashing and is not in line with circularity. And we also have to think, which links to my previous point, does increasing recycled content actually reduce primary resource use? So if we're looking at product level efficiency gains, if we continue to grow, if economic growth continues to expand and a company continues to grow, then those product level efficiency gains will essentially be outpaced by that growth. So we can't recycle our way out of overproduction. we need to reduce the levels of products we're actually throwing into the circular economy in the first place, and make the circle smaller. So the next point I want to look at was really, given that the title at the top of this talk today is climate talks, just to really take a quick look at greenhouse gas emissions. So we often hear top level numbers about how the impact the textile industry has in terms of climate emissions. So there's many ways that textiles contribute to climate change. I just want to look at two of them here and some of the associated challenges. So of course, the first big one is the fiber choice. And it's really important to highlight that fast fashion is very much underpinned by the soaring use of fossil fuel-based synthetic fibers, which, as I mentioned before, drives microplastic pollution. And microplastic shedding is something that the EU Textile Strategy has committed to look at. So that's something that we're very much welcome at the EEB. And I've got some statistics here. I won't go into too much detail, but synthetics are likely to represent 3/4 of global fiber production in 2030, with polyester accounting for 85% of this share. There is no perfect fiber, though, of course, all have an impact. And I want to make a really important point, which I think is really interesting for journalists, is that comparing fibers is complex, and the methodologies behind the comparisons are, there's often a lot of vested interests in there, and the data used have different boundaries. So, for example, can you compare cotton grown in a country in Africa with cotton grown somewhere else, for example, in different meteorological conditions, different seasons, and then, of course, the social impacts of how you recommend one fiber over another, depending on the different communities whose livelihoods around the world depend on that fiber. So there's a lot of aspects there. And then, of course, the climate impact is very much down to energy use in production, all the different stages. And there's a huge challenge when it comes to in the European Union in terms of how you actually impact the full supply chain, which is often described as Scope 3 emissions, because many companies don't actually own all the facilities in their value chains. There's a lot of subcontracting. And of course, when you're talking about impacts which take place, often over 80% of supply chain impacts take place in the global south, where many clothes are manufactured. So yeah, lots of challenges there. I'm going to try and speed up because I think I'm really running out of time. But so yeah, already the points I've made, probably you're already getting a picture of the complexities when it comes to defining what sustainability is in fashion, when it comes to defining that into policy. So one issue, I've kind of summarized this here as calculating, tracking, comparing, and communicating the impact of textile products is a really hot topic, I would say. And just a few points here. So green or greenwashing, who gets to decide? There's currently, the Commission has announced that there will be a tough approach to unsubstantiated green claims, which is something Francesca also touched on, in terms of, if you're buying a product and they tell you it's circular, what does that actually mean? What conditions was the product made in? So we really need much more oversight. And you can see that I've got two examples here on the slide of one from the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority, and the Norwegian and Danish Consumer Councils in the Nordic countries, who have referred particular brands to the Consumer Ombudsman for misleading green marketing. So and this links to my previous point about the complexities of comparing fibers. There is lots of discussion at the EU level at the moment of what would the data be, and how you will substantiate the green claims that are allowed. So I can go into more detail on that, but maybe I'll speed up. And then also to link to something Francesca said, this difficulty of substantiating claims and trying to find out what conditions a product's actually been made in links to the need for full supply chain mapping and facility disclosure. And that's something that we very much advocate for. And in terms of the EU textile strategy, the Commission has proposed to develop a digital product passport, and which would include information on circularity and environmental impacts. So what we're calling for is that this digital product passport could be a real opportunity to support full supply chain mapping and the disclosure of all the facilities in the value chain as part of a coherent approach with other legislation that looks into bringing about more business accountability in terms of human rights across the supply chain. So just 2 more quick slides.
Martin's question is very much relating to it, of saying, you know, should there be a quota for recycled fiber in new clothing? As you were talking about a passport to see where clothes are coming from. So could that be an option? Martin is asking, in your opinion, what is the best policy instrument to get fiber recycling out of its niche? So should there be a quota for recycled fiber in new clothing?
Yeah, so I suppose this does actually link to my next point. So I think I'm not sure what you mean by out of its niche, but I suppose you mean how we can move it away, bring it towards fiber to fiber recycling. So there isn't one particular policy instrument, but what we advocate for to get into the kind of policy jargon is this kind of coherent approach, a coherent framework. So for example, I mentioned eco-design measures, and now I'm about to talk about extended producer responsibility. So you can use all these different what are called product policy measures to essentially pull the market up, and you push the worst practices out of the market. So say, for example, we want to disincentivize the use of fibers made from plastic bottles. You could charge what's called eco-modulated fee that would advantage people or companies that use recycled content from let's say the best type of recycling, and that penalize those that use recycled fibers from whatever is deemed to be the worst type. So it's a sort of, it's about incentivizing, it's about using all these different policy tools to incentivize and disincentivize particular practices. And there's another question from Julia. So definitely, I hope that what is coming out in my presentation is that it's really it's not about individual consumer choices. We really need systemic change. So we really are very clear that it shouldn't be on consumers to just consume less. We need to create the economic conditions which make it easy for everyone to take part in sustainable activities, whether that's reusing their clothes, whether that's having access to repair shops. It's definitely not about, it's about putting accountability and responsibility on those who are making massive profits from churning out collection after collection. I'm just going to go to the next slide because I think that, and now I'm seeing the chat. So how to export in closed countries. Yeah, so these last 2 slides, I want to look at the textile waste mountain. So
a bit so we have more time for tuning. Yeah.
So basically this point really is to show that as part of the EU textile strategy, as I mentioned, this extended producer responsibility will be one measure which intends to look at waste, and there also will be restrictions on exporting textiles so that what is exported would actually be secondhand clothes for resale and not waste. And you can see, I recommend you read this recent report from Greenpeace Germany, which has, as you can see from the picture, some really shocking images of the reality of what actually Europe exports to the rest of the world. And then I'll just go to the very last slide, and then I promise I'm finished. If I can go, I can't get the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, there we are. So there's a big blind spot in the textile strategy that it doesn't really look at the mechanics of the business model. And the workers are very much left out of the equation in terms of human rights and fair working conditions. So this is something that we really want to see more of. And my very last point is that ultimately we need action on purchasing practices, because it's the purchasing practices in terms of brands having an unequal power imbalance to set low prices, lower prices, which are lower than the production cost, to demand really short lead times, making last minute changes, or indeed not paying, which we saw a lot in the pandemic. If we don't tackle those purchasing practices and the power imbalances in the industry, that is what underpins the overproduction and the exploitation of some of the world's most vulnerable workers. So yeah, we would like to see more emphasis on this in the follow-up to the textile strategy. So that was a whirlwind tour of some of the issues, and I hope that gives some food for thought for where different areas that you could look to write stories in and ask more questions. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I think the last question is in the chat is very much applying to you. As you have done so much research on it, which country you see as an example in terms of extended producer responsibility of textile producers?
We don't have yet the legislation in place, but I believe that the expectation could be to see countries that were first, let's say, in implementing in the country the waste directive, which means France and Italy was the second. So I forecast that France could be the first country, let's say, going a little bit faster. But still, this is not the present. It's the near future, I believe. And I also wanted to add a point on Lily's question, how to stop exporting clothes from countries to development countries like my country. I don't know where Lily's from.
Lily's from Indonesia.
Indonesia. So I had the chance to visit, thanks to UNECE, very recently Chile, and maybe you know about the Atacama Desert in Chile, but there is also a desert in Ghana and other hotspots, let's say, in terms of collection of waste, textile waste. The big issue is really coming from the fact that the quality of the material has been decreasing in time. The quality of the textile waste has been decreasing tremendously in time. And I'm pretty sure that Emily agrees very strongly on this. And this is actually related also to the fast fashion business model that has been pushing basically towards quantity rather than quality in time. So this is really where we need to tackle the problem. So we need to go back to, on one side, educating the final users to use more the products. On the other side, asking the companies to think about durability and inserting durability as eco-design principle in the concept of quality, and eventually using incentives in order to accelerate this change. This is my point of view.
Thank you, Francesca. I do have a question. We have, you have touched policy, politics, frameworks, regulatory frameworks, and what is going to be necessary on that side, and what the industry should do. That is one thing. I don't want to get educative, but I think, how could we implement all this? There's a change in consumer behavior within the societies. I mean, is there an aligned with the EU social economic strategy? Because only, trying to discipline the industry as one point, but if we as the consumer do have a significant point, could that help? Would that help? Would our voices be enough? Or are there strategies already researched at the university, Francesca?
Well, we all need to focus at different levels, I believe, on final user education. Of course, at university, we're definitely responsible. Journalists are responsible too, I believe, media in general. But my personal point of view is that very soon also governments with behavioral campaigns should tackle this problem. So they, just like they did for cigarettes and tobacco, but also wines and spirits. This is something that we should see soon, probably also in the fashion industry. So not just in terms of how to manage the waste, the textile waste that we have at home, but also how to consume responsibly, not just drinking responsibly or no smoking.
Thank you, Emily. You were nodding.
I think this is really a really interesting question, and I kind of touched on it as well. I mean, the main way I come at this is that for me, the first and foremost, the responsibility should be on big companies, the ones who have created the problem. But that's not to say, of course, that we can't all play our part and that there's a role for education. And I really agree with what Francesca said about making it a public health issue almost. Of course, the most sustainable garment, people always ask you, if you work in this area, how can I be the most sustainable? And of course, the only way to answer that question is to say the most sustainable garment is the one you're wearing or the one you already own, and to wear it continuously. But I think there's also a lot of work being done about consumption, and often a sort of industry talking point is very much that fast fashion has democratized access to clothing for vulnerable people, for people in low incomes, and maybe that is true, but I think we also have to be realistic, and it's also a bit of a fantasy to think that everyone who's buying cheap clothing is doing so because they can't afford it. I think we also need to be, which comes back to this what I said in the beginning of my presentation about opportunity, that what's driving new consumption is often opportunity and want, and because it is cheap and because it is available. So we really need to get into the dynamics of consumption and understand it, but from the perspective of trying to regulate those who are pushing that consumption, not just putting the responsibility on the shoulders of us as a society, as consumers. So yeah, I think it's a really really interesting aspect.
Unfortunately, we are coming to an end of our 60 minutes, but you gave us so much input and so many links and ideas, and that's highly appreciated to both of you. Emily, you go first, and then Francesca to conclude. Both of you give us 2 takeaways for the next, let's say, 10 years. What should be the most important issues?
My goodness. Well, I think my takeaway, very, very quickly should just be that we really need to look at overproduction. We need to look at numbers and all the different ways that needs to come into the policy response. And I think that journalists have a key role there to tell the stories, to look into what's not being told, and to break through a lot of the greenwashing that is happening about sustainability. So I think that the story over the next 10 years will be that increasing consumer cynicism, essentially, about what we're being told and is sustainable or isn't. So that's me. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. It's been really great.
Our pleasure. Thanks a lot for taking the time, Emily. Francesca, and before you give the takeaway, I have a question which was sent to me, I forgot, by email from someone who couldn't participate today, and say, is digital fashion an outcome of all these problems?
I wouldn't say is an outcome. I would say that digital fashion is basically the consequence of the multi-channel approach that we have in the industry, and how consumers like to explore and evaluate possible products and services. And this has been the only option we had during the pandemic. Definitely, we need to focus on merging digitalization and sustainability, also because, and this is just a point, but we could go more in depth in the future, that given the e-commerce spread, also a lot of waste has been generated.
And transportation issues as well.
Transportation issues of the reverse logistics, given that a lot of products you decide not to keep, but you go back to the source. So the reverse logistics is definitely a big environmental issue that we need to solve. My last point will be an invitation to you, also to the international journalist movement that you are coordinating so brilliantly. And I really like this community already. And UNECE invites also you to join the call to action for transparency and traceability against greenwashing, and all the participants to this webinar today.
Thank you so much. There couldn't have been a better takeaway from you, Francesca, than this one. Thanks a lot again to both of our experts. Thanks a lot for taking the time. And we hope that we will be able, from your side, would that be okay to share your PowerPoints if someone is asking for?
I already did, yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good time. I'm very much looking forward to an update in a year's or 2 years' time on your research and on the strategies and politics. Thanks a lot for taking your time. Also for the participants and from all over, I'm very pleased to see it was not only today Europe involved. Hope to see you next time. Our next climate talk will be most likely on educating on climate change, and it's going to be on mid-June, as you have seen already the dates on our website. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Emily. Bye, Martina.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.